What is up, and welcome back to the Wisdom in Christ podcast. Today, we're here with Matthew Adams again.
How's it going?
And yeah, we're just going to have another podcast and just talk about who knows exactly what, but we'll just get going here. And we normally have something cool to talk about. So thank you guys for taking a little time to tune in today. And yeah, we'll just kind of get started. So what about your scripture study? Is there anything you've been learning in your study, anything that's been popping out to you, things you've been thinking about in your spiritual studies lately? Like what's been on your mind spiritually lately, Matthew?
So the other day I was reading in Genesis chapter 28, and that particular day the Lord had just from several avenues brought that same story across, my attention, and it is the story of Jacob's ladder, where he has the vision of Jacob's ladder and the angels ascending and descending upon the ladder. For me, the importance of that. So Lehi's vision of the tree of life and Jacob's vision of Jacob's ladder are very similar visions because they're depicting the same thing at the end of the day. I actually like the vision Jacob depicts better for some things, because the iron rod and the straight and narrow path and Jacob's ladder are both symbols for the covenant's path, because what Jacob realizes is that each rung on the ladder is a covenant he'll have to make and keep to get from where he is to where God is. And I like the imagery better because, like with a ladder, okay, so we pretend that like when we sin that it doesn't harm our progress or affect us, but it does. It absolutely does. It actually causes you to go back and have to begin again, which isn't necessarily a problem because there is a Savior and a Redeemer. Going back to the beginning, restarting is always a possibility. But when you're climbing a ladder, if you are to skip a rung or to neglect to hold on to a rung, you're going to fall down that ladder, and then you're going to have to start from a lower rung. And it's a simple start. Is you start with your baptismal covenants. Okay, you make yourself willing to take upon yourself the name of Christ. Again, you just continue to build on those things, and you can progress up the ladder faster than it took you to get up the ladder in the first place.
Right. You kind of, with God helping, you're able to go a little bit quicker than, but you can't even barely climb the ladder at all if you're trying to do it of yourself.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I like that imagery. Lehi's vision is not a bad thing or something that you should study both visions. They're good analogies.
Yeah, I like the Lehi's vision a lot too. So I haven't studied Jacob's ladder much. I've heard the analogy, but I haven't actually taken the time to really study it. And so I think it's cool that you connected it to the covenant path, because I have never even made that connection or thought about that before. Now I kind of feel like, man, what am I missing out on? Well, I need to study Jacob's ladder.
That is a temple text at the end of the day. So at the end of that vision, Jacob erects a pillar, he anoints it with oil, and he calls it Beth El, which is a contraction of Beth Elohim, which literally translates to the house of the Lord.
What?
Yep.
Okay.
So it's a temple text. Even though they weren't necessarily building temples. So Joseph Smith taught that any time the Lord has gathered a people together in any dispensation of time, he has urged them to build a temple. Like, that is the purpose of the Lord gathering a people together, is to build a house unto the Lord. And so we don't necessarily have a leftover record of Abraham or his direct descendants building a temple until Jerusalem, but we can imply, I think it's heavily implied that there were temples in the Old World and in the Old Testament. I think that.
Or maybe even tabernacles sometimes too, when they couldn't have a temple.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, so that's the thing, is that the priesthood was more prevalent in the ancient world than we typically tend to believe. So basically, my spiritual journey is I set out, I really wanted to become a scriptorian or an unofficial Bible scholar. So I don't know that I'm quite there yet, but I have definitely gained a lot more knowledge than I once had. And it's just I began to understand how interconnected like these people that they're interacting with in the Bible are. For instance, so the Midianites, right? are a group of people in the Bible. They live in Midian. Ruth is a Midianite. That's a famous Midianite in the scriptures. But the children of Midian were actually, so after Sarai dies, Abraham takes another wife. He actually takes several wives, because I know that the broader Christian world doesn't like to acknowledge this, but plural marriage was absolutely was often practiced in Old Testament times.
Yeah, I've read that before on Wikipedia.
Yeah. So everywhere that Abraham went, like when Abraham goes to Egypt and he teaches the people in Egypt, there are people that leave Egypt and travel with Abraham and choose to take upon them the covenant that Abraham is under, and they become Abraham's people. Same thing when he goes among the Philistines. Some of them leave and come with Abraham. So the covenant path, anytime, is always about bringing people in. That is the place that the Jews failed the biggest. Sorry to anyone out there who is of the Jewish faith, but they closed down and they're like, well, this is only for the Jews, when in reality the Lord had, even for the Jews, he imagined them gathering others to the covenant path. But so back to the Midianites. So these are people that descended from Abraham. When Moses leaves Egypt and he goes and he meets his wife at the well, Jethro is the high priest of Midian. He's a Midianite who has the Melchizedek priesthood. That is where Moses obtains the Melchizedek priesthood. Melchizedek himself is who gave Abraham the Melchizedek priesthood. And Melchizedek is the king of Salem. So, we see in this world, there are people who are descended from Abraham who absolutely have that priesthood authority in their societies. They fell into apostasy at different points.
Right.
In their journeys. Eventually the Midianites became corrupt, just like all the other Canaanite people. Many of those Canaanite people were initially part of the family of Abraham. Like the Ammonites and the Moabites, those are both descendants of Lot. The Ishmaelites are the Arabs to this day.
Lot's wife, Lot?
Lot's daughters.
Okay.
So the story of Lot is a little dicey, but after Sodom and Gomorrah,
but I just mean the same Lot that's in the story of
absolutely. So
of Lot's
that
look not behind thee.
Abraham's nephew.
Okay.
So what happens is, when they flee Sodom and Gomorrah, they go to a cave in the mountains, and they actually believe that the whole earth has been destroyed. They don't understand that it's just Sodom and Gomorrah that has been destroyed. So his daughters think that there are no more men in the earth, so they get Lot drunk, and they basically sexually assault him and have children by Lot.
Okay, I was reading that a couple weeks ago in the Bible.
The one daughter has Ammon, and the other has Moab, and they followed the Ammonites and the Moabites, who the Israelites will then come into contact with later. So I don't think it's difficult to conceive that there were temples in the ancient world, considering that the Melchizedek priesthood was more available than we typically tend to think in the ancient world. Like we think of only Abraham or only Isaac and only Jacob, but Abraham got the priesthood from Melchizedek, where the patriarchs lived in Salem, and so
the Abrahamic covenant is the same covenant that we technically take upon ourselves today. It's just a new and everlasting covenant restored, the Abrahamic covenant restored. So that same priesthood power is what you're talking about. There
were other groups of people that were living according to those laws.
Right. And that same priesthood was prevalent among certain individuals and groups of people even way back in the ancient world.
Right.
Probably even... So it started with Adam, didn't it? Adam was the first of the priesthood, and so then that same priesthood has been on the earth. It was the apostasy was the period of time where it was taken away.
There have been many apostasies. Right. So the Great Apostasy was unique because of it for a few reasons. The Great Apostasy was unique because of its duration, so it was longer than all of the other apostasies in history. And it was also more complete than all of the other apostasies in history, which is why it's called the Great Apostasy. And for those of you that don't know, the Great Apostasy is referring to the period of time after Jesus' death, before the birth of Joseph Smith. Well, before Joseph Smith restores the gospel. So you have about a 2,000-year period during the Great Apostasy and it's the longest apostasy. But when you read the Old Testament, you will actually see a pattern of apostasy and restoration. So those of you that argue that there's no need for a restoration, I would urge you to study the Old Testament and recognize that it is actually a pattern. There's a pattern of apostasy and restoration. But I digress.
But this will never have an apostasy again, right?
Correct.
That was part of the promise
Correct.
of the restoration, is that the gospel is restored until the time of the return
Correct.
of Jesus Christ, where
So we won't suffer
Yeah.
a loss in knowledge the way they have in the past. And that's another thing that people don't realize. Apostasies are not just a loss of spiritual knowledge. They're actually a loss of all kind of knowledge. The truth is that all light and knowledge comes from God. And so when his light and knowledge dries up, so does secular light and knowledge, like it or not. That actually slows down. I truly believe that the death of Jesus Christ and the advent of the great apostasy is a huge contributor to the Dark Ages.
right, like all the technology, all the innovation that we have in today's world is in direct
Look at Rome and look at the British Empire, right? So they're separated by hundreds of years, or maybe even thousands of years in history, and the Romans were arguably more advanced than the early British Empire in many, many, many ways, in their building techniques and their ability to move water and their ability to build roads. So like we absolutely see from the Roman and Greek period a significant loss of secular knowledge, and scholars to this day will tell you we don't truly know what caused the Dark Ages. I would postulate that it was the loss of spiritual knowledge that led to a loss of secular knowledge that plunged the world in darkness. I mean, the world attempted to extinguish the light of the world. So yes, light left the world during that time. And my personal belief, you can believe whatever you want, but
but now that we're living in the last days in preparation for the return of Jesus Christ, the amount of light and knowledge and development and technology
unprecedented
is insane.
Yep,
Right? We're living in a world where we can FaceTime our friends
Correct.
and see each other's faces thousands of miles away from each other
I can
instantly.
literally use my little magic mirror to see someone across the planet.
Yeah, and then like even the fact that, our cars and stuff versus how long it would take to have a horse go across the United States in a buggy,
Right.
horse in a buggy, like versus we can go to Salt Lake City in 3 hours.
Right.
That's a miracle. That's a modern day miracle.
That would be a 2-day journey at least otherwise.
Yeah. And even today, this camera right here that we're using to record this podcast in itself, you go back, 300-400 years? Or I don't even know. 100 years? When did the camera... I'd have to look it up.
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure either, but it wasn't that long ago.
For sure, if you go back a solid 200 years, I think you're living in a world without cameras.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it'd be interesting to know the exact date, but yeah, so... And then the thing now is people are taking it for granted.
Right.
Like they're not appreciating it because it's just become such a normal everyday thing, So what do you think about like the opposition part of it too? Because now that all this light's pouring out over the earth in a way that we've never seen before, what do you think about like the opposition that's going on in the world?
So this is going to be controversial to some, but the scriptures are clear that the current ruler of this world is the adversary. Even Jesus acknowledges that Satan is the God lowercase g of this world, meaning that is who holds the power in this world. That the thrones, the kingdoms of this earth are ultimately governed by the adversary. And so what I've come to realize is that what the time and the place that we're living in is that the adversary has spent all of this time on earth gathering the might of the power of this earth to bring against God. And because the war in heaven never truly stopped. It just continued when we came into this life and has continued for the entire duration of this world. And ultimately his goal has been to gather and to store up power so that he can bring that against the Lord. And I would tell you that we're living in the culminating acts of that preparation, and that, I mean, the prophets are clear. We're living in the latter part of the latter days. So we're witnessing the adversary bring to bear all of the power that he's gathered throughout the centuries. And, his ultimate goal is to attack truth and light and to try his best to extinguish it. And in some ways, he's been very successful in that endeavor. That is evidenced by the secular world in which we live in. It's evidenced by the massive return to paganism that we've seen in the modern world, which kind of is astounding, but it is what it is. We see that in the rise of witchcraft among the rising generations and how prevalent that has become. Is it okay to talk about
Yeah, we can talk about
masonry here?
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
Okay. When you begin to understand symbolism and how symbolism works in the language of symbols, right? And the Masonic order is an order that uses symbols to communicate certain truths. You begin to notice how deeply ingrained occult symbolism is in all of our media, in our government buildings, throughout our entire society. There's more witchcraft in more places. Like people, if you really dive into it and you really begin to understand the symbols and what's going on, you would not believe how involved in our society it truly is.
So Masonry in itself, like the symbols found in Masonry, are inherently good symbols.
Sure.
Like the square and the compasses, those symbols are inherently good. But then there are other groups of people or people acting outside of their Masonry.
The symbol itself is not necessarily good or bad. It's how it's utilized, right? At the end of the day, God also speaks in signs and symbols. He told the ancient Israelites in the Old Testament that he placed the sun, the moon, and the stars for signs, for symbols, and for seasons. So God is giving signs and symbols even through the firmament and through the stars. Like there's, I wouldn't say necessarily something to astrology as we practice it today, but like the movement of the stars is not meaningless. God has placed signs in the heavens since the beginning to now. I believe that he still places signs in the heavens. So I'll explain how I really began to understand the language of symbols myself. Please don't take this route. It's a very bad route. So there's a period of my life where I dabbled in witchcraft and the occult. And I used tarot cards for a long time. What I'll tell you, they are real. But they are the oracles of the adversary, and so they're very dangerous. And it did teach me how to interpret symbols in a way that I don't think I was going to learn otherwise. But I wouldn't recommend to go there because Here's the problem with it is, first off, it's very easy. Second, the adversary can lie, and it is his device, and he will slip lies in there as much as possible. And obviously, because it is the adversary's oracle, it's working according to his power, not God's power. But what I've noticed when I have friends that are like, oh, these are harmless, it's okay for me to do this, is that eventually they stopped seeking answers from God. They stopped searching, pondering, and praying the scriptures and went for the easiest way to obtain an answer, and ultimately had more faith in their tarot cards than they did in God, right? So these are absolutely devices that lead people away from truth and light, which is why I wouldn't recommend people to do that, even though it did help me to understand symbols. So what I would tell you is that the symbols with which those cards communicate are not in and of themselves necessarily evil. I see those symbols all over our society. The temple is a symbolic building, and a lot of what is communicated in the temple is communicated symbolically. And so symbols aren't in and of themselves inherently evil. It's how you're utilizing those symbols, and what power you're connecting to at the end of the day. Because even Joseph Smith was shown a vision where God showed him that there were two powers in this world, the power of the Lord and the power of the adversary. And he showed Joseph Smith that, and he said, you'll use the one and stay away from the other. And so the adversary does have a real tangible power that he grants to his followers. It's just not something that you want to contend with or to invite into your life.
Yeah, so there's a couple things I want to say about this. First of all, like the application of the symbols in Masonry, in which the way they're brought to knowledge in Masonry are for good and for moral conduct. I wear those
symbols on my body every day.
Yes, you do. Yeah, for moral conduct, for being a better person, for making good man a better man.
Right.
And so those symbols in free and accepted Masonry are used for good, even if the symbol could be used in a negative way, right?
Even the symbol of the compass and the square, there are people that use those symbols to communicate bad things.
I'm sure that there are. There's always two sides to every coin, right? So, yeah, so there's that, but like the aspect of people in our world, there's modern day Gadianton robbers as well, because God does have covenants, and also God has his way of doing things in light, with light, and then Satan takes that and he takes his own version and copycats.
Absolutely,
and he has
always
evil,
imitating the Lord.
He has evil covenants and evil promises that people make with him. That's a very real thing in today's world. And the thing that I see is that sometimes people end up like seeing the good in the world, like the Church of Jesus Christ or Freemasonry, and they will associate it with being darkness.
Right.
And then they take the darkness and they just aren't either aware of it, or sometimes they'll kind of unknowingly worship it, like through music or for movies or through philosophies.
Witchcraft and music is a whole
witchcraft, witchcraft and music,
itself, But
and so for me, I'm completely against witchcraft, tarot.
Same.
Anything that takes people away from Jesus Christ is not something I am supportive. When it comes to Masonry, most Masons in the United States, at least, are Christians. Like statistically, most of them are Christian. And, we take our oath, our obligation on the Holy Bible. Right? And so that's kind of... But then there are people just in any organization in the entire world that are not good people. And that do things for the wrong reasons.
I'm going to say, again, something controversial, but I believe to be true. I believe that there are people that are active members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that knowingly serve the adversary.
I believe that's true too, yeah.
So you mentioned covenant. The adversary has covenants. And so that's actually evident in the story of Cain and Abel.
Yeah,
so
I was just thinking about
what is it about? So Moses was a murderer and was not a son of perdition. So what separates Moses from Cain? So when you really dive into the story, what you begin to understand is that Cain rejected the covenants that he made with God, and slaying Abel was his sacrifice to enter into covenant with the adversary. So
wasn't there like a secret code, like some secret thing he was given? I was reading in it a couple months ago or something. He was directly communicating with Satan.
Yes, and he
said, listen, if you do this thing.
Yes. Yeah. And so the adversary does have a set of covenants, and there are people to this day that absolutely enter into them, whether people want to acknowledge that or not. And often those are entered into by blood sacrifice. I know that, again, is controversial to say and believe, but I think there is ample evidence for it at this point, both scripturally and in the real world. And The thing about making covenants with Jesus Christ is it tethers you to Jesus Christ in a way that nothing else can. And especially in the times that we're living in, you really want to be pinned into a covenant relationship with Jesus Christ, if at all possible, for your life. It's paramount importance.
Because of all this stuff, all the people that don't have good intention, all the people that are influenced.
Like it or not, you can go do your research on your own, and you can discover that the music industry is filled with witchcraft and sorcery, and that there's power in the spoken word. Anyone who has studied the science of the mind, anyone who has studied these things quickly begins to understand that there's power in the words that we speak. So even just singing along with a song, you are actually giving yourself into spiritual dominion over evil spirits. And again, people don't want to hear that because we like the music that is on the radio and we want to listen to it and sing along. But think of, if your mind is a garden, right? What are the seeds that it is watering? It's not watering seeds of goodness and kindness and compassion and love in you. It is watering seeds of hedonism. It is watering seeds of immorality. It is watering seeds of violence. It is watering seeds of unforgiveness. So,
which is really prevalent in today's lyrics, and even the vibe inside of the music can carry spiritual.
Yes, and so that has a profound spiritual impact on you, whether you're willing to acknowledge it or not. And
which is why I really appreciate when people do like good music and do choose to use uplifting words like kindness, compassion, love. Like those words, there's a power in them.
Right.
And when you say like, I love you, man, like there's like literally like a power in that that's from God. It's like a godly power. And I think if our world would be more careful about what they listen to, what they look at, what they speak, and myself, I'll start with myself. I need to do better, even myself, And I think if you do that, then the world could change.
Yes. I'm not perfect. I do listen to secular music sometimes. I try to limit the secular music I'm willing to listen to. I'm fairly selective about the artists I'm willing to listen to. I sometimes watch media that maybe isn't the best media to watch. So I'm by no means perfect in those things, and no one is, but I have gotten significantly more cautious about what I'm willing to allow into my mind and into my heart when I'm consuming.
It's like, as for me, or I know this is just true, as you get closer to God, or maybe a better way to word it would be as God's Spirit starts working in you more, those things become more repellent to you, where you're like, whoa, there's like a greater gap between the old self, where you used to appreciate it, and that new self where you're putting on Christ, and you're like, oh, wow, this is old wineskins, as it said, this is something that I can't, like, get behind anymore in the way that I used to, So that's been what I've noticed and stuff, so... So we've had quite the podcast episode today.
That's an interesting one.
We got into crazy stuff. Good stuff, though. Important things people need to hear about, because, definitely people need to avoid certain things. And I think that if we can focus in on the light of the gospel of Jesus Christ, of reading the scriptures, and if we can do that as a world, then all this stuff that shouldn't be there can be cast out in the name of Christ. And when Jesus Christ is the influencing spirit in somebody's life, those things, like we were just saying, start to become less important and less, something that they care about and stuff. So,
well, cool.
So you guys stay safe out there. Study the scriptures every day. Read the Book of Mormon every day. If you've never read it, read the Book of Mormon. Start reading it. You're going to love it. Read the Bible. Focus on what you're letting into your mind and your body and what you allow into your spirit, because everything is spiritual in life, and you guys will be blessed. And I know that Jesus Christ will help you do that if you decide to serve him and choose him each and every day, even though you're going to make mistakes, just like we both do every day, Matthew. I know I was just the other day listening to something I shouldn't have been listening to and looking at something I shouldn't have looked at. So,
Cool.
Anyways, we love you. We appreciate you. Thank you for taking the time to tune into to today's podcast. Looking forward to seeing you guys in future podcast episodes. And as always, peace be unto you.
Have a wonderful day.